I'm going to start with this question from Oliver on Instagram. Now that the Champions League and Europa League knockout playoffs are over, do you feel the round has been a welcome addition to the European football calendar? Andy?
You know what? Despite myself, I'm going to have to say yes. Ooh. Because it does feel as if the reformatting of the Champions League in general hasn't been the ruinous threat to competitiveness that a lot of people thought it would have been. But it does feel like quite a lot of manufactured fake jeopardy.
Yeah.
And we're playing a lot of games to not really do that much. Now, obviously, that's contrary to what a lot of people, and including me, would actually like to see in football, which is players that are more rested, fans that have got a bit more money in their pockets, all of that sort of thing. Having said that, I think the layer of drama that this provided, it's kind of like the playoffs. I know the playoffs are morally wrong. The top three should get promoted, and I say that as a fan of a team who got promoted after finishing 7th in a season, in a League Two season. Yeah, we did have a great second half of the season, etc., etc. But really, that shouldn't be possible.
But it is a sprinkling of magic, isn't it? Which is a nice thing.
What do you think? Do you think injustice is the added ingredient?
Well, I don't know if it is injustice because the winner of the playoff goes through on merit based on the changed parameters. The
rules at the start of the season.
The playoffs.
Yeah. There's a sort of a hint of injustice. I know what you mean. That the team who finishes third just gets pipped to second, doesn't go up, and then the team who wins a few games towards the end. But as Jim says, we've all bought into it. But going back to the
in terms of this. It's, funnily enough, as the way the draw worked out, it did feel as if everyone was getting their just desserts. Like Manchester City got Real Madrid because they weren't good enough in the group stage. So it felt like the draw felt quite well, whereas Dortmund just missed the cut and they ended up having a bit of a breeze against Sporting. But it did feel there was genuine jeopardy in this. So even if it was manufactured, it wasn't a last night of the Champions League group stage, oh, well, if we finish in top 8, we'll get a bit more time off. It was genuinely something worth having, a place in the last 16 of the Champions League. So, look, I thought it was great. I think the fact that the ties weren't, whereas you have in recent years, the first knockout round ties, which is the last 16, spread over. So that sort of modern idea of there being football on TV all of the time, it feels as if they're spread thinly over too many weeks. So you would have 4 ties in one week, 4 ties in the following week, so you can watch all of them. On one hand, great, but that feeling of mania, that feeling of everything happening at once, it's actually quite nice. Well, I mean, that's something that I kind of miss in modern football.
Well, the sort of 3 p.m. Saturday kickoffs.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that point. Jim, I mean, obviously the new format of the Champions League, we spoke about it a lot, as everybody has. I suppose that if you were to say, right, the first sort of 16 teams or, whatever it would be, would go through.
And then that's it.
I suppose what maybe UEFA are thinking is to add a bit of spice to make sure that you get into that top 8, trying to make it a bit more competitive, trying to make a little bit of jeopardy there. Because in the old format, when the top 2 would go through from all the different groups, you want to finish first because the idea is you potentially get that on paper or in theory the slightly easier draw. So that's clearly kind of what they're doing. So this playoff round, of course, comes from this whole new format. I mean, what have you made of it all?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to look at this without thinking of the 2 extra games in the league stage and also the 2 extra games that these teams have to play as a playoff. But I think we should look at it separately from that because I think that's a slightly different argument. I think, it's. I appreciate what Andy's saying, and I do agree that essentially, knockout games between very good European football teams tend to be entertaining, and that's what's happened. I think that the kind of negative side of it is that it has in some cases, apart from with Man City and Juventus, acted as a safety net for the big boys who haven't done the job with regards to the league stage of it, and I think that's a shame in a way. Because I mentioned it the other day that there's this feeling from UEFA, and I think the Super League is an idea of this as well. Like they do want to see the big boys playing each other deep in the competition as much as possible, and I'm sure the viewing figures reflect that globally most people want to see that as well. But
that's why you have seeding.
Yeah, but we would also much rather some unfancy teams got further and made it more often, right? I think that's far more entertaining as a sort of general fan of football. So
They're the great stories, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. So I think this lessens the chances of that happening.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
You're thinking about poor old Brest, aren't you?
Well, yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, they're the perfect example of that, actually. But I'm thinking about what you've just said, and I've been thinking about it a lot. Like, if the top 16 teams went through, would that feel like a bit of a damp squib, or does it only feel like a damp squib in comparison to this manufactured jeopardy that Andy's spoken about there? I'm not sure that it would really. So I think it's been okay this round. If Arsenal ever need it, I'll be delighted it's there, I'm sure, but that's not a reason that everyone has to kind of put up with it, I guess. So I think it's I don't think I'd miss it if it were gone, to be honest.
But it felt like there was a degree of shock as well. If you go back to that first night earlier in the week where you get two unfancy teams winning, you get Feyenoord knocking out Milan, you get Club Brugge knocking out Atalanta, and Celtic, Bayern pushed right to the end against Celtic. So I mean, that's whereas like my tempered criticism of the group stages is like manufactured jeopardy. Even if the round is a new construct, there's genuine jeopardy in this.
Yeah, I suppose the opportunity for a shock and an upset is there, isn't it? Which is potentially a good thing.
It is. And I think you can look at PSG particularly and go, the safety net. But really, Manchester City should have been the beneficiaries of the safety net, but obviously they weren't because A, they were playing Real Madrid, and B, they weren't good enough to take that opportunity.
I think you make a good point that there was genuine jeopardy and there was genuine drama in this round, whereas, as you mentioned there, to extrapolate slightly, the last round of games in that first phase, it was suddenly like, oh my goodness, it's like added time multi-ball, to quote that funny advert from years ago. It's kind of like, this is crazy. And we all thought, oh, this is interesting. And you think, this kind of was just like what we had before, the final round of games to see who would qualify. There was always jeopardy. There was always kind of toing and froing. It just looked slightly differently in the league table. So that big night that they were talking about kind of was just like any other night of the last round of games. Whereas, as you say, Andy, this was another round of knockout games which provided its drama.
Yeah, and I think it's a kind of unpleasant truth of football. Like what I was saying at the beginning.
It's all completely futile.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not just football, Andy. One might argue.
Yeah, let's not get beyond that.
I wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't.
No.
But I think when you look at sometimes what turns out to be really good is perhaps not put together for the best purposes and perhaps not the best thing for the sport. So I don't know, if you look at third place teams dropping out the Champions League into the Europa League, for example, that is going to have a massive effect on this season's Europa League. Now, I know we can say, okay, it's more fair and equitable. There should be no reward for losers, etc. And you can see from a distance what your genuine path is in the competition. The last sort of 8/16 of the Europa League has been brilliant in recent years. Do you think it'll be as good this year? Because I look at the teams this year and I'm thinking probably not.
Yeah, because the Europa League was kind of already doing this.
So, like when you think of like Arsenal, Napoli going back a couple of years or whatever, loads of games in the back end of the Europa League where you're thinking, oh yeah, this is Champions League level. I'm pretty sure I won't be thinking about, or we won't be thinking about any of those games that they're Champions League level this season.
Yeah.
No, but at the same time, isn't there an argument that the teams who qualified for the Europa League should? There's a sort of duty to them to exactly. There's a duty to them to let them have a crack at winning a Europa League under the same parameters as everyone else in that competition.
But that's what I'm saying, Jim. I guess that's the point. That it's like I totally agree with you. It's fairer. It's more equitable. Is it as good a spectacle?
Yeah, I guess it remains to be seen, doesn't it? Because this is the early stages of it.
We could throw your Football League argument back out there as well. Is it fairer to have the playoffs? No, but is it
more entertaining?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing, isn't it?
They have created drama, even if the drama is a bit more kind of clearly manufactured than it is in some other degrees. I mean, the Bodø Glimt game the other night is a great example of that we wouldn't have had without it. Ajax as well, going through, not to mention all the Champions League stuff. So it served its purpose in terms of what UEFA wanted from it.
Jim, you never think you'll be double screening Ajax and Shamrock Rovers until you're double screening Ajax and Shamrock Rovers.
It's it's an encouragement or warning to us all, Andy. There we are. Hope that answered your question, Oliver. All right, quick break and then more of your questions. Right, Jim, you've got the next one.
I do. Fortis Leo from the Discord has been in touch. He asks, if Harry Kane ends up lifting a trophy this year with Bayern Munich, where would that rank among the most universally popular achievements in recent football history?
Just a little add-on. You're barred from answering this question, Marcus.
It's domestic. It's different, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, of course, if he was to lift the World Cup, I think that would be very universally popular in my household.
Yes.
Fortis Leo, always lovely to hear from Fortis Leo. Very active member of the Discord, of course. I think he would get a lot of goodwill if he was to win a trophy, because a man of his talents, it would be criminal to think that he could go a whole footballing career and have all those personal accolades and top scorers and golden boots and his name top of the charts in various ways for England and Spurs and so on, and to not have a major team trophy. I honestly, it would be just shocking. It would be so unfair. You know, the previous question we were talking about justice. My goodness.
So is this his Shearer with Blackburn moment?
Well, no, because Shearer with Blackburn, I mean, I know Blackburn spent a lot of money, blah, 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 but it's still quite an outstanding achievement from Blackburn. I know in the context of the day, it wasn't like that outrageous kind of thing, but it was still, you know, and that was also at a time when you thought Shearer was going to go on to win many and so on. In hindsight, yes, Andy, I think that's a fair... Although Le Tournois as well, Andy. Don't airbrush over Le Tournois, okay?
I never would.
We just simply can't.
No, Roberto Carlos wouldn't like it.
Certainly not. So, yeah, with Kane, you know, obviously there's been a couple of finals for England, a couple of finals for Spurs, and it's like, my goodness, you know, because if he wins one of those finals for England, of course, then it's immortality, really.
Yeah. I think the concern for Kane's career, I suppose, was that people would think, is he going to retire without winning anything? And then the story will be, what an amazing player, England's record goal scorer, etc., but didn't win a trophy. That now becomes exactly the same, but didn't win a trophy for Spurs. But I think...
Which is something you can get behind.
Which I can absolutely get behind. But if he, you know, if he wins something with Bayern, which I think he will this season, I think actually... what will then be appreciated is the loyalty he showed to Spurs. A lot of players would have left a long, long time before he did. And I think it was probably quite easy to convince Harry Kane each time it came to sign a new contract that, you know, we're going to push on now, we might win something. And I think, you know, he's obviously not just loyal to them, but they were upwardly mobile for a long time. But I think that will actually be appreciated once his trophy cabinet starts to fill up.
Yeah. And it, to the point, really, where I find myself, I'm cheering for Bayern in the Bundesliga this season. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry, Andy. I know that goes against everything that you know one should stand for, and so on and so forth. But that's what it's come to. But
not necessarily. But I think that's the other half of the question, really, isn't it? Where would it rank amongst the most universally popular achievements in recent football history? Because, like, realistically, if we're talking outside the English-speaking world, perhaps. Who's cheering for Bayern apart from Bayern fans? Yeah. Really?
Yeah, but I was going to go on to say that actually, according to some reports, now I would like to just say that this is a teeny little sense that perhaps we got from this over the year, but I don't think it was outrageous to find a Brazilian who actually felt quite happy for Messi winning the World Cup.
No,
yeah.
I personally know one.
Yeah, well, there you go.
More than one.
Now, that is remarkable. That is... not quite, because the dynamic's obviously a bit different, but it's not a million miles away from a Scotsman being pleased for England and Harry Kane winning the World Cup.
It's not that different, you're right. And
Scottish people, I say that with every wincing ability in my face, but I just want to, as we're talking about Kane and in this context, to mention Messi Argentina and to say that was the case, because you recognise the brilliance. I know Messi was he's the greatest of all time and all that. I'm not comparing the two in terms of ability, of course, but in terms of winning a particular trophy, Messi, it was the World Cup was the only one left to emulate what Maradona did, all that sort of nonsense. I think it has to be that one's up there as well, and how it kind of got that was universally popular.
I think it's a really interesting comparison, because I think if you'd have asked Brazilians beforehand, would you be pleased for Messi if he'd have won the World Cup, they'd have said no. I wonder if this is a bit of a junction in Harry Kane's career, really, because like obviously he's been enormously successful for Spurs and England, but I tend to think he's respected more than loved.
Yeah.
He's not a player who you think, I love that guy. I think you can say you really like him, you really respect everything he's done. I think this might be the moment that changes it for him. Once he gets that trophy, maybe people will realise that, a little bit like Messi, that sense of, actually, I do really like him. I am really pleased with him. I think it might actually reframe how people look at him as a player and a person, really.
With that in mind, can I put a slight twist on the question to both of you? If Eric Dyer ends up lifting a trophy this year with Bayern Munich, where would that rank amongst the most universally popular achievements
More
in
so.
football
It's up
history?
More so.
Don't forget old Eric, who's still he's in the hunt for his first major trophy. I would say that back in the day, when Gabriel Batistuta left Fiorentina, slightly similar to when Harry Kane leaves Spurs, they're in the Champions League. They're sort of reasonably regular in the Champions League. If you forget how good, one may forget how good Fiorentina was. Batistuta, what a player!
Yeah,
like just a phenomenal goal scorer, phenomenal.
One of the best number 9s ever.
Yeah, indeed. It just magnificent stuff. And the bulk of his career is at Fiorentina. We all know him. It's iconic, him in that kit. There's a flipping statue of him outside the stadium. He was never going to win a Scudetto at Fiorentina. They won a Coppa Italia, okay, fine. But that's not held as it, well, it certainly wasn't at the time, I don't believe, held as high in regard as, say, like the FA Cup would be here. I wouldn't have thought now, but it certainly wasn't back then in the 90s. But the Scudetto was the one he was after. He goes to Roma, of course, and Roma win the league immediately after that very moneyed Lazio team under Sven win it. So it was kind of interesting at the time what was going on in Italian football as well. But Batistuta goes there, and it was gutting for the Fiorentina fans for him to go back in those days when players would stick around clubs. Because Kane was a bit of a throwback, really, you could argue.
Yeah.
And so I think there's comparisons, and I think that now, certainly with hindsight, but I remember at the time just feeling, oh, thank goodness Batistuta has a Scudetto title.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting how differently that's looked at in football than other sports. Because if you look at American sports, if you look at basketball, for example, Kevin Durant, best player in the NBA for ages, and then people really judge him for leaving the Thunder to go to the Golden State Warriors, who are already winners. People accuse him of being a ring chaser because, of course, you get the ring when you're a champion. People would never say that in football. Like, they would never say, oh, you've gone to a team to win stuff. Shame on you.
Yeah.
Is maybe the closest example we've had to that in England Andy Cole going to Man United from Newcastle? There was a sense that, like, oh, he'll definitely win the league if he goes there.
Or I suppose any number of Arsenal players going to City.
Yeah, Robin Van Persie, though.
Yeah.
I mean, Robin Van Persie, again, wouldn't have had a Premier League title if he hasn't gone for Manchester United.
Yeah.
But that was, obviously, I think...
Kane has taken the path of less resistance.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. But I think with Kane going there, I think he probably would have had maybe even a bit of understanding and goodwill from Spurs fans as well, because it's another country, whereas Arsenal fans, perhaps not.
Yeah,
with Robin Van Persie.
I imagine we'll probably cut this bit out, won't we?
Andy, you've got the next question.
Yeah, I do. This is from Brad on Instagram. With Howard Webb once again appearing on Mic'd Up to tell the world that his referee's got another decision wrong, this time admitting Miles Lewis Skelly shouldn't have been sent off against Wolves, is a programme that only ever produces negative headlines about refereeing performances really a good thing for the PGMOL to participate in?
See, I don't really think that they see it that way. I think they see it as an exercise in transparency, which I suppose, technically it is. But the incidents they discuss they tend to be a long way in the past in terms of how quickly the Premier League moves.
At least
it's like a case study, isn't it? Rather than like news.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And it's the emotions have dissipated from whatever the incorrect decision was by then. So it just
that's by
feels,
design that they've been doing it that
completely.
way.
But it feels meaningless. But
Agreed.
But I don't really think it is serving its purpose, really.
I think maybe at the start there was a novelty about it, and I think they were just trying to say, look, okay, I understand this is a new thing. We're going to try and explain it to everyone, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But you're right, it quickly became, we knew it was the wrong decision, or we knew that was a contentious one. I understand why you've maybe not given that or whatever. And I feel that it's this show is kind of like it's come to it, whatever purpose it was to serve.
We'll wait till it's blown over, then brush over it, and then another mistake will happen.
So what do you guys think of Michael Owen's role in it? I mean,
Baffling.
I don't massively want to get stuck into it.
Regrettable, Andy?
Almost, I think it would be better to have a slightly more pugnacious footballer, even if they even if they're not that aware of the rules, I think which a lot of ex-footballers aren't, and a lot of current footballers aren't. I think to really put the question that other people are thinking.
He's basically a nodding dog, isn't he? Like one of those little toys you could get.
But like even if you had Robbie Savage going, I don't agree with that. I just don't agree with that. Why don't you agree with that? Because I don't agree with that.
I agree with you, yeah.
think,
Not him, but...
Right, but you know,
well, I don't agree with that, Andy. You shouldn't be on the show. I understand what you mean.
Yeah,
at least in the name of entertainment.
Yeah,
at least.
well, but in the name of entertainment, and actually in terms of the whole point of the exercise, right, is to have these things
to explain
understood and explained.
Yeah.
So those things,
Troy Deeney, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
But the problem is you would need a proper presenter, and then have a potential chat between Howard Webb. I think that's the problem.
Always looking for extra work. I love it. You're the man. I'm voting for you.
Thanks,
I'm
Andy.
voting for you.
So you don't necessarily want someone going, that's wrong, I don't disagree with that, but you want someone to essentially find the points of interest in the argument and say, okay, well, to me, this looks like that's wrong for X reason. Can you explain to me why it's not? And I suppose Owen does it to a point, doesn't he? But
they kind of do that better on Sky, where they do that ref watch thing on a Monday on Sky Sports News. Don't they?
Again, another reason we don't really need this show.
You know what would be much better than this show? If you could just have, and going back to the liveness of it, and it's been mentioned before, but what they do in, say, Germany, for example, have the referee come out and explain it afterwards. Because not only does that make it more relevant because it's more current, and it's not about I think we have this idea here of we'd just be hanging the referees out to dry. It's not. It's explaining the process.
How does it go in Germany?
So,
then?
for example, if there was a decision that people didn't agree with, didn't understand, the referee comes out into the flash, the bit where the player. No,
the mix zone.
The flash is where the players.
Another place.
There's another place. It's just on the cusp of the tunnel.
Right. Okay.
So it's where almost immediately after full time. So
that's straight off.
So for example, it doesn't have to be that.
Okay.
Of course, it could be done in a mixed zone, or it could be done in a flash a little bit later on. But you know, where you have that almost live reaction, for like 5 or 10 minutes after kickoff,
like the manager,
where they go, we've gone down to Pep Guardiola, or we're going to Erling Haaland to get his view on the game or whatever, and the referee just gets up there, explains it. And there was a really interesting one earlier this season where you had Marco Rosa, the RB Leipzig coach, who got really annoyed about one decision. Now, he was doing his flash interview in the next bit to the referee who's explaining the decision. And he leant over and he goes, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I really appreciate the explanation. I was a bit of an idiot and I shouldn't have reacted like that.
And that's good TV.
And I got it wrong. And they shook hands. But, you know, I know it's good TV, but it's also creating a climate of trust.
Well, it does.
Because you're explaining it in a non-confrontational way that is still in the context of the game, so is still meaningful.
But Andy, that's when the decision and everything goes well. Yeah. What if it doesn't? Someone like, Andrew leaning over. Hang on a minute, mate. That's absolute collar. You have a Jim McLean situation.
Oh no! Let's not go back to Big Jim.
Maybe what we need rather than Michael Owen is Matt Letitia. He's someone who's not afraid to ask tough questions about things he simply doesn't understand.
He asks irrelevant questions though, Jim. Yeah, but what does this mean though for 5G? What? Why did we? I don't
stay on topic.
Yeah. So I think what we're saying is this show really. If it indeed did serve a purpose, it's probably not now. And
it's an interesting idea, but maybe hasn't worked out.
Yeah, it's like watching a quirky little memory in real time.
Oh dear, I think we need a break. Righty-ho, we've got this from Jordan on the Discord. We talk about the best and worst managers of all time. Do we talk about the worst managers of all time? I don't know, maybe Jordan does. But who would you say is the most underappreciated manager in football history? History, Jim?
It's a big one.
All the way back to your man Herbert Chapman.
in 1992. It's a huge question, isn't it? And we mentioned him recently. I want to mention him again. I think Jupp Heynckes is a manager who I'm surprised he is not spoken of more regularly. It might be because his career was so freewheeling and wide-ranging, but he, I'm sure most of you listening will be familiar, but I think the most striking thing about his career actually happened quite late on in it. So he was in his third stint at Bayern Munich. He'd been appointed because they're in a bit of an emergency as far as Bayern Munich go. And it goes quite well, but they finish second in the league. They lose the cup final to Dortmund, and they lose the Champions League final to Chelsea on penalties in their own stadium. So that's doesn't sound great so far.
And then the metro in Munich stops working.
Which has never happened before.
Because of it.
It's a sign of the end times.
Because it'd been a while since they won the Champions League for a club of that size.
The next season, wins the treble, breaks all kinds of records in terms of points, wins, goals, like an amazing, amazing achievement. And in the January of that season, it was announced that Pep Guardiola would be his replacement. And I don't know, maybe that freed him up, maybe that freed them up. But I mean, it's quite late in his career. He did go back to Bayern again for another spell in similar situations, actually, to sort of to just kind of guide them for a little while. And in 1998, he wins Real Madrid's first Champions League since 1966, which is
massive.
Huge. Like when you look at the juggernaut they are now, it's mad to think they went that long without winning one,
indeed.
and that's massively significant. Took Tenerife to the semis of the UEFA Cup.
Yep.
Chuck him anywhere and he'll do it. It's not worked for him absolutely everywhere, but I think he's won a lot of different things in a lot of different environments, and those European achievements are a massive thing.
Well, and to give him his full props, 2 Intertoto Cups with Schalke, of course.
And also won a lot as a player, won the World Cup and the Euros as a player.
Yeah, I remember at the time when he essentially sort of handed over to Guardiola, because they'd already...
Very willingly.
Yes. He would, as you say, it was already agreed, and that was what was going on. And I remember Jim at the time thinking what Jupp Heynckes would say to Guardiola as they left, and he could just look at him and go, all you can do is match it. And he didn't even do that.
What a mic drop, though.
Oh, my goodness.
It's incredible.
It was incredible. I think Jupp Heynckes is a good one to say, because such longevity. I mean, he as an assistant coach, he was a part of Borussia Mönchengladbach winning the UEFA Cup in the late 70s. Late 70s to 2010.
The longevity is unreal.
It is unreal. And it's kind of like, how on earth have we not... Is he not maybe mentioned a bit more?
Absolutely. I mean, he won his first Bundesliga title with Bayern in 1989. That's as a manager, obviously.
Because these achievements we're talking about are... Some of them, at least, are in the modern era. It's not as if, obviously I mentioned Herbert Chapman at the start. You go, why is another manager from, the post-war period in Hungary not appreciated? Because unless you really read into the history books, I mean, we all love a bit of Bela Gutmann, how mad he was and so on. But sometimes when...
You're going on things you've read rather than things you've seen.
Exactly. So, with Jupp Heynckes, I think it's a good one. I think that the career of Terry Venables is a bit underappreciated.
From QPR to Barcelona, never to be seen again.
Did Tarat man? Did Neil Warnock man? I can't. I'm sure there's a player there who went. But I think Terry Venables, he was one of the kind of the last sort of quite innovative English coaches. There's such a dearth of top English coaches. Really, since, I don't know, when do you go back? I mean, 90s onwards, maybe even slightly further back. But I think old El Tel, even though his team, Steaua Bucharest managed to keep a clean sheet in a penalty shootout against them in the European Cup, he still was kind of quite well regarded at Barcelona, and obviously would end up England manager, of course, in the Euros in 96 and so on. But I think he's slightly underappreciated because of all like the off-field stuff and I'll just say the money stuff. I'll just leave it at that. So I think he's sometimes underappreciated when we think of great English coaches.
He's a bit like English Sven, isn't he? Really, everyone who ever worked with him absolutely loves him. Yeah, and it's kind of about the vibes.
Yeah, and also Euro '96 was a massive thing for English football culturally.
Yeah, enormous.
It was enormous. Yeah, and I think that people look at him fondly, but they don't realise, I think, that he was a great coach or manager as well. So I don't think he as an individual is underappreciated, but I think as a manager and coach, I know that sounds like I'm sort of slightly splitting hairs there.
I think it is a really interesting point to make, and that's why I think Zinedine Zidane falls in this category as well. Because
it's ridiculous, isn't it? But I agree with you.
3 successive Champions Leagues, which is remarkable.
And the Champions League, there was always that quirk that it had never been defended.
No, that's
in the
right.
Champions
in the
League
Champions League
iteration.
era. Yeah, that's right, since 92. So for Real Madrid to do that when it's, they kind of feel like it's their competition and it's what makes them who they are, is amazing. But I think it's kind of like a similar thing, really, in that he's such a recognisable figure, such a universally loved figure, but very few people can actually explain what he did. And you will still hear people go, well, Zidane really doesn't understand tactics or anything like that, which is ridiculous, obviously.
You just went and get out there, lads, and express yourself.
People think it's like that because he's a very rare coach who doesn't like speaking that much. His
aura, though.
No, you're right. It is the aura. But whenever he's asked about tactics, just like whenever he was asked about politics in the late 90s, he ducks the question.
He's sod off.
He doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to talk about it at all. So he would rather say it's the players, which is, funnily enough, like Xabi Alonso in, I guess, a slightly more verbose way, is a little bit closer to that, which is why I think he'll really work at Real Madrid, because there's enough superstars at Real Madrid. If you know Real Madrid, you know as a coach, making yourself the superstar, as Mourinho proved for quite a lot of his time there, is really not the flavour.
No, absolutely. You're another employee there, aren't you? Even if you are Zinedine Zidane at that stage. And also, surely it's possibly as simple as just not wanting to give your tactics away.
Yeah. Yeah, but the idea that there's not a huge art in managing all those egos, I think there's a little mention here for Stefan Kovac as well, because if you go back to the start of the 70s, people look at that Cruyff Ajax side that won the European Cup in 71, 72, 73. And they're like, Rinus Michels. He only won the first one. He was off to Barcelona. Yeah. And people look at Kovac and say, well, he was just taking up a winning team. You don't really have to do anything, which is the most ridiculous thing to say ever, isn't it?
That would suggest that that Paisley didn't do much at Liverpool.
By that logic, there should only ever have been one team that ever won anything.
Exactly. But in the spirit of that, if I may just mention one more, I think not in Spain certainly, but maybe in other places, Vicente Del Bosque.
Yeah, I agree.
I think because he takes over Spain when after they'd won the Euros in 2008, but the side who win in 2008 are a little bit different to the side in 2010 and 2012. That side does evolve. You think about what was his name? Was it Marcos Senna in the centre of the pitch in 2008?
Great player he was.
He's a brilliant player. Yeah, a very different type of player though to what they would then go on and have in there. But he just shows you. People think of Real Madrid and Barcelona around those sides. I think, well, of course you had those players. Well, Mourinho was knocking about Real Madrid, so in idea of the kind of so-called tiki-taka, and God, he doesn't like that. But different kind of very different style of play to say Barcelona. But also with Barcelona, again, you've got to get these players to play, and also you've got them to bloody like each other. You've got
to unite them is big.
Absolutely huge. Enormous. It really is. So
but he's the ultimate star fluffer, really.
Right.
Del Bosque. Because if you think he was...
Because of that tash.
I think so. He was Zidane at Real Madrid before Zidane was.
Yeah.
That idea of a sort of star shepherder. And he manages to do that at Real Madrid and win a Champions League. And he manages to do it with Spain as well. But he's just, I guess, a less media sexy version of Zidane.
It was less sexy, yes. I would agree with that, in case, depending on what you're into. But also as well, the different styles of play, it was all about the 1-0s and keeping the ball so the opposition couldn't score. And then in the Euros, I mean, in particular in the final against Italy.
Managing fatigue before it was fashionable and therefore actually a bit of a pioneer.
Well, blimey, I didn't think of that. But again, this idea...
Like possession as containment rather than cutting through the other.
Well, I think it's a brilliant point. And also as well, the side evolved, as I say, and the thought of, anybody could have managed them. Okay, they had a brilliant set of players, but you've still got to manage them. You've still got to get
loads of good players before and never won anything.
Exactly.
I wonder if that's why both Zidane and Del Bosque are perhaps a little bit underrated, so to speak, because they're almost like...
the Real Madrid
they're like Waitrose managers. Do you know what I mean? Like I think you throw Spain into that with Del Bosque as well. In that, like... They exist in rarefied air. They are Zidane of course, he only managed Real Madrid, but you think, well, he was a Galactico, so it makes sense that he would be able to get the best out of these players. It's like, and people would be like, oh, but could he do it at Real Betis? It's like, I don't think it matters whether he could or he couldn't, because we're basing on what he actually did do. Yeah, but again, he is of that kind of really, really elite standard that is that very few people manage to come by. Just a very quick mention as well, I think, for Howard Kendall, who won two league titles, the FA Cup and the Cup Winners' Cup with Everton in the 80s, in a decade that was obviously dominated by their neighbours, which must have added an extra bit of spice to it. I don't know whether that was motivation or whether it was a hindrance. Who knows? I think he was very unlucky that Everton twice missed out on playing in Europe because of the ban on English teams in European competition. And I think when I was growing up, he felt like a bit of a kind of like Peter Reid style managerial merry-go-round kind of Steve Bruce type.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But I at the time wasn't aware of everything he'd achieved with Everton, but it was quite a lot.
You've seen the Amazon doc on him? It's brilliant. Quite recently came out.
And I'd also like to add someone who's underappreciated is Marcelo Bielsa. Jim, you've got the final question.
Yes, this is from Harry on Instagram. After Andy admitted on last week's Uncut that he likes to drink a Bovril at the AFC Wimbledon games, I'd love to know what your go-to food/drink combos are at English football grounds. None of this patatas bravas stuff, just your good old-fashioned English football food.
So unless it's a burnt burger or a pie with an unidentifiable meat in it, we can't give an answer. Is that what
come on, Andy. Look, Jim goes to Arsenal.
Yeah, I do. Actually, you know what? The food there, some of it definitely needs an upgrade, I have to say.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, the burgers, they're not worth £17.50.
Oh my God.
It's outrageous.
It would have to be.
It doesn't even come with chips.
It would. Lost for words. My goodness. I mean, if the burger was like, look, here you go, that'll feed you for a month. £17.50. That there will feed us for a blooming month.
So there's a lot of variation, to be fair. I have to say, I don't really eat football very often, but I do love a hot dog. It feels like one of the few places where you can have it. You can have a hot dog in the cinema because you're in the dark and no one can see what disgusting little pig boy you're being. But I think football makes it okay as well. Although I think it's the Everyman cinema where they it's one of those nice cinemas where you can order food from your seat and they'll bring it to you. So they do this in the dark. The hot dogs, they put the sauce on the outside of the bun.
What?
So they'll hand you a saucy bun in the dark and you'll get it all over your hands while you're just trying to enjoy your movie.
Jim, let's be honest. You're talking about being handed saucy buns in the dark at cinemas. These aren't Everyman cinemas, are they? You're going to.
That's the name of the chain.
One man's cinema is another man's peep show, actually, by the sounds of it.
The counteraction to that, during the 2018 World Cup in Russia, and obviously there are a lot of things that we mustn't look towards Russia in terms of behaviour.
But we're talking about cuisine, though.
But when you get served a modern burger on a little chopping board, right, like you would these
days, what you want here.
It would turn up with like a pair of like black latex gloves, sort of like a tattoo artist would wear, right. And it sounds horrible, right? But it's really good. You eat it and then you just peel the gloves off at the end. No mess.
Well,
I mean, that's very artisan, isn't it? Very artisanal.
Well, anyway, we've got to talk about English grounds, Andy, because that's what we're being asked here. Or British grounds, I think we can extrapolate that out. Because
sadly, we don't have the sausage trains that St. Pauli once had, so we have to just work with what we got.
Well, absolutely, Jim. So you've mentioned hot dogs there. I mean, I do love the traditional meat pie, I have to say. I'd had that in a number of grounds growing up in Scotland. Yeah, but
Scotland's different for pies. Scotland is a level higher for pies. So I'm not even sure it fits into this chat.
Well, I said extrapolate to British. So I could crowbar it in.
But I just do think when it comes to pies, there's a massive differentiation between what English football is capable of and what Scottish football is capable of. Okay. I think the last game I went to in Scotland was a couple of months ago. I went to Spartans just in Edinburgh.
Yeah, I know you are.
And there, this one of the people working there, they turned up with this box, like a box about I don't know, about 3 foot wide and 2 foot deep.
I would immediately think a Krispy Kreme 12 donut box you've got there.
Right, you might
Gwyneth
think
Paltrow's head,
but like.
I don't get the reference, but I'm enjoying it. Blimey, right, yeah. Just got the reference. Andy, carry on with the Krispy Kreme vibe.
It's a sort of box that you might expect something to be delivered something from Amazon in. But you opened it up and there were loads of pies in there. None of them in any packaging or whatever. And goodness knows, we don't want too much single-use
Circular
plastic. Going
pies.
back to the Russia point. Yeah.
Like proper, I'm not,
Yeah.
I know the ones. you
All
mean.
just in there. They tasted amazing.
Probably lamb. I think they're lamb.
I didn't eat all of them. There were so many different options.
Oh, was there? I like that.
So many different
I
options.
like the sound of
But
that.
the best pie I'd had in a while.
You're both big pie men. They're messy though, aren't they? So do you have strategies for coping with that?
I bring,
I mean, you've presumably got your
gloves.
food gloves from Russia, but
Yeah, the mind quite simply boggles.
I think it's more likely to end up on the face than the hands with a pie, because I remember covering a game between Southampton and Arsenal once, and they had these chicken tikka pies at half time, and I took I had one. I didn't even finish it actually. I took a couple of bites out of it, and I passed someone I know coming out of the toilet about 5 minutes later. Going into the toilet 5 minutes later, they were coming out. They didn't point out to me, which I subsequently noticed on the mirror, that I had a bit of tikka sauce on the end of my nose.
Oh, you like the Gruffalo. Well, I think that's it. I think that's it. And I would just a Fanta or something like that.
yeah.
I mean, I do like a Bovril, but I think a meat pie and a Bovril together.
Depends if they offer you a lie down afterwards.
I want to know what it's like to grow old. I think so. I'm not going to go for that combo, but fair play if you do. So there you are, Harry. So very sort of meaty and Fanta-y things. Although I tell you what, though, in the new Everton Stadium or Everton Stadium, you can't even call it the Everton Stadium, can you? But I'm sure we will.
I guess it's funny because now we're calling it Bramley Dock, but before Arsenal moved into the Emirates,
Bramley
it was
Lawn.
Ashburton Grove.
Yeah, everyone said, we'll just call it Ashburton Grove, and then just no one did after about 10 minutes.
Well, they said on the menu, we know there's a toffee donut, but they said also there's a Korean spicy chicken-y affair going on there. One or two people mentioned that.
Oh, I'm into that.
I thought you would be, Andy, because you quite simply hate everything this country produces.
Something I'd love to see, actually, is there's a long-running joke in Parks and Rec where one of the characters thinks mini calzones would be a brilliant takeaway food. And I agree with him, even though the characters laugh at him. I think it'd be ideal for football, wouldn't it? It's essentially its own container.
It's called an empanada, Jim.
Is that? Oh, is that?
No, I'm only joking. No, I know what you mean. It's very similar. I mean, it's not that similar to a Cornish pasty, is it, really?
Well, I guess it's a hot pasty, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of.
It's an inside-out pizza.
Yeah.
It's the container issue is what I think makes it.
But a mini calzone does make sense. But an empanada, I think, is where I would, if I was to choose, Harry, if I was to choose the menu at Fulham, I would put the old...
You've completely ignored the question.
I
Forgetting your
said
own food
a
preferences, and I'm in favour of that,
All right,
for what
okay.
it's worth.
And a chocolate bar. Available at all football stadiums, I think you'll find. Thanks for listening to the Football Ramble Mailbag, part of the Acast Creator Network. I'll be back on Monday with Luke, Pete and Vish to react to the weekend's football. Please do send us your responses, opinions and questions for next week's episode, and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Ta-ta!